So, and all of this was kept hush-hush. People have asked the question, well, how come nobody spilled the beans? How come, you know, but in those days, you didn't have the National Enquirer. You didn't have People magazine. You didn't have Kitty Kelly, you know, writing, you know, stories about these people. Everything in those days, you didn't have public libraries. You didn't have newspapers. You didn't have play reviewers. And so, and nobody wanted to get into trouble. Nobody was going to say anything. And of course, if you read the sonnets, you can see an awful lot of Marlowe in the sonnets themselves, because he's the only one who fits the autobiographical material in the sonnets. And so this was a very well-kept secret. And I believe that Marlowe probably lived a couple of years after the publication of the first folio. He may have married. I think he did at least have a daughter, because if you read the last play, The Tempest, you have Prospero and his daughter, and Prospero is Marlowe, because Prospero is a writer who is like God. He creates a whole world. He creates people. You know, Marlowe created people who are more real than actual human beings. Take Hamlet, for example. King Lear, Cleopatra. I mean, these characters are so real that even today they have an impact on the reader. And also you can see in the plays, as they're developed, from Marlowe's early plays, beginning with Dido, which incidentally is a very interesting play, Dido, Queen of Carthage, because there in Dido, Queen of Carthage, Aeneas has escaped from Troy, from the destruction of Troy, and he winds up on the shores of Carthage in a shipwreck. And he is brought to the Queen Dido, who falls madly in love with him. And she asks him to narrate what happened in Troy. And he gives this very graphic picture of the horror that took place in Troy. Well, once you know that in Hamlet, when Hamlet invites these players to put on the play that's going to undo the king, he asks the players, he says, can you give me a sample of your acting? And he says, there's this wonderful play that was about Aeneas and Dido. And it was caviar for the generals. In other words, it wasn't very popular, but he said, but it was a great play. And how a Prince of Denmark would have seen it, we don't know. But anyway, he asks them to recite something, and he says, oh, you know, there was this passage. And he gives the first lines, and of course the actor then delivers what is basically the speech that Aeneas gave in Dido, you see. That was one of the chief clues, to my mind, that Marlowe had written Hamlet, because he was able to insert, not only did he insert Dido in Hamlet, but you find us mentioning Dido in many plays. I guess he wanted to give that play publicity, you know, for a revival of some sort. But in any case, that's the sort of thing. Now, in case you've never read Marlowe, you probably are familiar at least with one of the greatest lines in all of English literature. You know, in his play, Dr. Faustus, and you know, Dr. Faustus sells his soul to the devil, to Mephistopheles, and he's condemned. He knows he's going to go to hell, But he asks Mephistopheles, he says, bring me Helen of Troy. I want to see Helen of Troy, this goddess, this most beautiful woman in the world. And of course, Mephistopheles is a very nice chap, wants to please his captive. Brings Helen. There's Helen of Troy. And Dr. Faustus looks at her and says, is this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the towers of Ilion? Everybody knows that line for some strange reason, you know. But in that play, Helen is held up as some great goddess. But later, when Marlowe wrote Troilus and Cressida, which was about the Trojan War and the destruction of Troy, Helen is there, but she's no longer a great goddess. She's just a blonde bimbo. She's an airhead. So you can see what happened, his change of view of the Trojan War, because Troilus and Cressida is a very anti-war play. And what he shows in that play is that this was a totally needless war. That they should have given Helen back to, you know, her husband, her Greek husband, that it wasn't worth dying for Helen. It wasn't worth the destruction of Troy for Helen. And of course, Marlowe holds them all responsible for this ridiculous idea that, you know, the honorable thing to do was to defend Paris, who had kidnapped Helen. And of course, Helen and Paris lived a luxurious life of pleasure, you know, and they were pretty useless as far as because Helen would not let Paris go out and fight the Greeks. She was very protective of him. And Paris would refer to Helen as my Nell. Nell. Nell is the term that the British use, you know, as a kind of affectionate way of referring to their wives. My Nell, you see. So she's just an ordinary my Nell, and of course a total airhead at the same time. But you have to read all the plays. You have to read Marlowe and Shakespeare to become a Marlovian, basically. And that's what I advise you to do. At this time in life, what better occupation can you have than to read all the plays? I had to read them to write my book. But I think you'll enjoy the plays also, because they're marvelous masterpieces, and the characters are beautifully drawn. I mean, even the so-called minor plays, you have great lines, great poetry, great insights into human nature. That's why Shakespeare's read today. It's because of his understanding of human nature. He was a realist. Now, how was it that Marlowe was such a realist when it came to human nature? Well, Marlowe had been educated at Cambridge at Corpus Christi College, which was very Calvinistic. And it was Calvin who promulgated this idea of man's innate depravity, that man was sinful by nature, and that only adherence to God, only faith in God could save you from your own sinful nature. Well, that's what you have throughout all of the characters. They're all human beings with sinful natures doing horrible things, but yet redeemed by love. In certain areas, you know, they were like Romeo and Juliet. Also, you will find in the plays a lot of fake deaths. At least in 4 plays, you have fake deaths. You also have lots of themes about exile, which of course Marlowe had experienced. And even in Hamlet, Polonius is supposed to have been modeled on Lord Burleigh, who was Marlowe's boss in the espionage thing. And it's Burleigh who instructs one of the characters to watch out for his son, who has gone to Paris. Laertes has gone to Paris, you see. And Polonius is very concerned about what his son is doing in Paris. He's running around, gambling, or doing all sorts of things.